Hello and welcome back to the Orlando Adventures podcast. I'm your host Russ, and this week's episode is the Itinerary One. Honestly, I've tried to say that about 4 times already, and just at this point, I've just got to commit. I might not be able to say the word itinerary very well, but yeah, I hope everyone's well. Thank you so much for tuning in as ever. And this week's episode is an extra special one. This is an extra special episode because this is the first episode that is going on YouTube as well as Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. So I appreciate all of you who've opted to go onto YouTube and watch this instead of listen. So it might be a bit of a weird experience for all involved, but I hope you enjoy it nevertheless. So getting into the Itinerary One. The question is, do you make an itinerary or do you not make one? Well, as you all know, I've discussed this a few times in the past, and ultimately, if it were down to me and it was my trip, then I absolutely 100% would do an itinerary. So whether or not that is a really structured one or just loosely something to kind of base your holiday on, I think that making an itinerary is really, really beneficial. And having made one over the years and done it quite a few times at this point, I really couldn't imagine doing a trip without having made an itinerary. So ultimately, there's a few things that I will say with regards to having an itinerary that makes it worthwhile. I'll say that basically it makes the trip, in my opinion, an awful lot more enjoyable. The reason why is it's so much less stress. It's so much less stress when you're actually on your holiday, on your trip, and you know that you've kind of done the research already. You've already put the legwork in. So you can basically go out there and just enjoy the time which you are out in Orlando. The other thing is there's so much less frustration. There's less frustration in missing out on things. It's one of the like my pet, I don't know whether it's a pet hate. I just don't want people to miss out on things in Orlando. Like, obviously, there's so much you can do. There's so many different things in Orlando that you can do to make your holiday and your trip fantastic. But ultimately, when it comes to trying to fit it all in, it can be difficult. So what I will say, and I'll get into it a little bit later on, but ultimately, you know, if you've got stuff that you really, really want to do and it's an absolute priority and a must, then you know, you just need to plan for it. You need to plan it into your trip because otherwise you will risk missing out on the things that you want to do. Let's kind of get into how exactly I would do it. So basically, in terms of how I would start, how I always would start with my plan for a Orlando trip is start with however many days that you've actually got in your trip. So say you're going for 14 days, then map it out, whether or not you write it down, whether or not you put it in your calendar, I don't know, but work out how many days you've got and work out how many days you've got, like full days. So obviously your travel day there and your travel day back, really, I would never count those as like days to do activities. You might get lucky and you might have a earlier landing flight and you might be able to, you know, get a park trip in the evening, but I wouldn't plan that as like one of my main activities and main days realistically. So I say you were going for 14 days and you've got your travel day and you've got your travel home day as well. You're probably going to have 13 whole days in my mind, because I imagine you're doing 14 nights. The next thing I would do, so once you've mapped out how many days you're actually going to be there, work out how many parks it is you're planning on doing. So if you're looking at doing Disney, you've got 4 parks straight off the bat. If you're looking at doing Universal, then you've got another 2 on top of that. So you're already at 6. If you were to look at doing SeaWorld, Busch Gardens, Volcano Bay, any of the other water parks as well, then, you know, you could be tipping 10, 11 days of parks doing different parks as well. So I would absolutely map out which parks it is you want to do, because the problem is you obviously need to buy your tickets in advance for these things as well. So if you are planning to go to Disney, but you're also planning to go to Universal, then you're going to need to get your tickets before you go out there. And the same applies with Busch Gardens and SeaWorld as well. The next thing that I personally would do is I would work out how many rest days you're planning to put in there as well. I am an advocate for a rest day. I think that having a rest day on your Orlando trip is a must do. I really do. And when I say rest day, I basically mean a day that you're not necessarily doing parks as the sole focus. Like on a rest day, I might go to a park in the evening, but I definitely wouldn't be doing the park in the daytime. So I might be doing different activities around Orlando, whether or not that's, airboats, going to, I don't know, mini golf, shopping, going out to Tampa, going, here, there, or anywhere. There's so many things you can do. And I know obviously I've discussed these things an awful lot over the past few months. The final thing that I would probably look at as well is which part do you want to do first and which part do you want to do last? Once you've kind of got your groundwork, so you've written out your 13 days, for example, on your calendar, and you've now worked out that, let's just, for this example, let's just say that you're going to do the 4 Disney parks and you're going to do the 2 Universal parks. Well, you've got 6. You can basically plan out which part do you want to do first. Say you want to do Magic Kingdom first, because that's the tradition. So you've got MK in as day 1. You might have it that you're going to do your Universal at the end of the trip, for example. So I might plan in 3 days of Universal parks. I might do 1 in Studios, 1 in IOA, and then a joint one, for example. So you're already at 4 days. You've got 9 days left. I would probably put a rest day in the middle somewhere. So you've now got 8 days. Put the other 3 parks in, you're down to 5. It'd be worth just working out whether or not you're going to double up on any of the Disney parks as well. So, this is what I'm saying. You've got to kind of work out what it is you're planning to do, where you're planning to go. Start kind of filling the days out. Go first, last, rest days. And also, the other thing I will do is plan around weekends. So on the weekends, you might find that the parks are going to be quite a bit busier. Obviously, you can go online and you can find kind of like crowd calendars for a lot of the parks. It might be worth looking at, but ultimately, if you've got the time out there, I would probably personally try and avoid parks a little bit on the weekends. Ultimately, that's not to say don't go, but all of the Florida residents are likely to go on a weekend, which, absolutely makes sense. But it'll just be worth just trying to plan around that a little bit. So now that you've kind of like mapped out your first day, your last day, which parks you're going to do, then you can start looking at whether or not you were to think about swapping any days at any point. Ultimately, as I've said before, in the weather one, for example, it's going to rain more than likely at some point on your Orlando trip. That is an absolute given. And it might be worthwhile, just in this example, say you were planning to do Volcano Bay. Let's just chuck Volcano Bay in there for this example as well. Ultimately, if you were looking to do Volcano Bay, then you're not going to want to do that on a day that it's going to rain. You might want to do something like, I don't know, Universal Studios, where the majority of the rides are inside, just as a thought. So I would always kind of have a couple of days that you're happy to swap around if it comes to it. I would try and get, if you're going to do a water park or you're going to do like SeaWorld or Busch Gardens, where the rides are predominantly outside, and I'd probably say IOA on that as well, due to the fact that Velocicoaster and Hagrid's being the 2 kind of big ones are obviously outside. If I would try and plan those in as days you're going to do and kind of get them done when the weather's good. So that's how I would do it. I would just kind of plan around the weather a little. The next thing I would do is work out the park hours. So depending on what time of year you're actually going, the park hours change quite a lot. They typically always open at the same time, but quite a lot of them close at different times. So, if you're trying to go to Islands of Adventure and you want to do a whole day there, and you want to make a whole day of it, and you want to be there into the evening as well, you're going to want to plan for a day where the park might shut at maybe 8 or 9 opposed to 5 or 6. So that's another one of those that will probably be worth doing. On that, with regards to the park hours, the other thing bearing in mind is working out when shows are. So work out when things like the fireworks shows are, and the parades and the evening shows might be. So it's worth just kind of working out when those are, when it is you're actually planning to do those as well. The next thing I will say, so we've kind of got the parks covered. You've got the parks covered. You know which days you're going to go to the parks. When you've got that kind of straight to an extent, Now we can start looking at things like dinners. So whether or not that's kind of dining reservations, character dining, or like kind of just standard restaurants outside of the parks in Orlando, then I would write a list of which restaurants it is and character dinings and diner reservations you're planning to do on your trip. Ultimately, like I said at the start, the last thing you want to do is end up missing out. End up missing out on, like, for example, a restaurant that you really wanted to go to. Like, I'd be gutted if I didn't get to go to Cheesecake Factory because I didn't factor it in. I would absolutely have a list and say, like, in my previous example, you're going for 13 days. You might want to plan maybe 10. So out of those 10 dinners, you can basically work out which ones you kind of roughly plan on wanting to do at different times. I wouldn't go too regimented on the dining outside of the parks, but obviously, if you're planning to do character dining and dining reservations, then you're going to need to plan them into your trip. If you're going to plan them into your trip, then it might dictate when you're going to do certain parks as well. So that's another thing that is worth putting into the itinerary. With regards to dining outside of the parks, I will say that a lot of these restaurants on the weekends, same again, are going to be quite busy. So if you're planning to go to like Cheesecake Factory, for example, I would probably look at doing that on a weekday because otherwise it is going to be very busy and you may run the risk of having to wait quite a while for a table, depending how many of you are in your party. Ultimately, if it's just a couple of you, you'll probably be fine. But four and over, I mean, four, you might be okay. Anything over four, you're probably gonna look at a bit of a wait for a lot of restaurants on a weekend. But yeah, so your list is kind of coming together. You've got your days of when you're going to be there. You've now mapped out your parks, when you're going to do them, on which day roughly, when your rest days are, when your other activities are as well. Now you've got some like dining reservations potentially booked in. You've got your character meet kind of dinners as well. And now you've also roughly planned out when you're potentially going to dine off-site as well, potentially. You might be dining off-site all the time. It doesn't matter. The point is that just make sure that you kind of plan these a little bit. I'm not saying that like you need to 6 months ahead, you need to work out whether or not you're going to be going to Chili's on a Wednesday night. Like, I don't, and that's not the point. The point would be if you really, really want to do Olive Garden, for example, then at least have it in the back of your mind that you're planning to do it. If you don't think about it and you basically get to Orlando and then just try to wing it, you might end up missing out and you might end up just like kind of forgetting about it, or it might just not end up being on the right day. So then you end up just not doing it. You know, if it's down to me, I would just try and plan. Next thing I would kind of work out into a bit of an itinerary as well is breakfasts. Again, probably not going 6 months ahead and working out when I'm going to go and have a Denny's. But obviously, if you're looking at doing character dining, if you're looking at doing dining reservations, if you are looking at dining off-site and you want to do specific restaurants, obviously you don't need to plan those in. They're not going to be that busy. It's not going to matter. But what I will say is it's worth working out when the park's open. So if you're a rope drop person and you're planning to get to a park for rope drop at 9 o'clock, then I'd say you probably want to turn up there 20 past 8, 25 past 8. In my opinion, that's what I would do. So you're going to have to kind of map it back from that and work out when it is you're planning to go for breakfast. And then you might have to drive to, I don't know, say you were staying on International Drive and you went to IHOP and then you decided that you're going to drive to Disney, which is quarter an hour drive. Just need to map it out a bit. So it'd be worth just kind of like having that in the back of your mind as well. Again, I'm not saying like plan it all 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance in terms of you're going to go to IHOP. That doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is just at least know that obviously if you are planning to get to somewhere for rope drop, then you do need to plan ahead and you do need to ultimately probably get up a little bit early, which feels a bit mad. It feels a bit crazy. I love crazy. And yeah, so you might enjoy it. You might enjoy the getting up early on your holiday. You know, I know that some people don't, but ultimately, if you're on an Orlando trip, you're probably going to do it. And if you want to make the most of your trip, I would recommend doing that. Next thing I will say with regards to food, while we're on the topic, Personally, unless you're doing character dining, I wouldn't plan out eating in parks. Obviously, have like the snacks and foods that are like must do's for you in the parks. So, for example, like a must do for me, as I mentioned in the Ellie and Mitchell episode, I've never had a Dole Whip. I don't, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I, it's inexcusable. I'll be honest with you at this point. But yeah, so on my next trip, that's obviously going to be one of my must do's. That's going to be one of the things that I want to get done. So I'm gonna go into the Disney parks with the view of going and grabbing one. So, if just using that as an example, if you know that you really want to get some of these specific snacks that you might only be able to get in specific places, then you might want to plan that in a little bit as well. Again, like, let's not go silly. Like, I don't need to plan 6 months in advance that I'm going to go and get the Shrexel at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning at Universal Studios. You don't need to do it. Like, you don't need to do it. But it's just worth doing a little bit of planning. And like, anyone who's in this kind of like Orlando community has seen all of the amazing snacks, all the amazing foods. And I'm sure you've probably got a list of ones that you want to get done. And for anyone who's been there before, obviously over and over, you've probably got your snacks that are your absolute go-tos that you've got to have every single time. Next thing I will say, when putting together a bit of an itinerary, you're going to want to plan out the rides that you want to do. And the reason I say that, and I don't want to regiment your day, but there's a few factors with regards to rides that are going to be totally worth kind of like just knowing and just planning for a little bit before you go, because otherwise it's going to end up being carnage. If you are desperate to ride Gringotts in Universal Studios, I would say, personally, if that is your priority and that is the main ride you want to do, rope drop the park and head straight there. Don't rope drop the park and then go and stand in a 45-minute queue for Minions, because it's not worth it. What I'm saying is, like, if you've got priority rides, go and map them out a little bit. Go and map them out for kind of like start of the day, or map them out to go and do them in an evening as well. You might have rides that you're planning on doing in an evening, but obviously you're going to need to make sure that you're in the park in an evening as well. So it might be that you need to plan out when you're going to do those as well. Obviously you can wing it. It's all good, but just have it in the back of your mind. I might not itinerize that I'm going to go and do Velocicoaster at night on a specific day, but I might at least plan in an evening at Islands of Adventure. So getting back to the rides, there's a few things that you might need to plan ahead for. You might need to plan what park are some of these rides in. Like, obviously, if you're new to Orlando and you don't know that Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind is in Epcot, and then you turn up to Magic Kingdom and are mightily disappointed when it's not there, then that's a bit of an oversight, in my opinion. Like, ultimately, go in there with the knowledge. And I appreciate that it's going to sound a little bit silly to a lot of us who've been a lot of times. We know where the stuff is, but not everyone does, and that's absolutely fair enough. And I like, fair play. Like, obviously there was a time when a lot of us hadn't been much and we didn't necessarily know where everything was. And like, there's so many rides in Disney, for example, that you might not know where certain things are. You might assume that something's in one place logically, and it might end up being somewhere else. So, for example, say you wanted to go and do like Moana, the Journey of Water or something like that, and you might just assume that it's going to be an Animal Kingdom again, but then you might be disappointed to find out it's in Epcot. Just kind of know where the main rides you want to do are, and then you can plan into those days a little bit more. Getting into that, you might need to know some rides are going to require Disney, they're going to require a virtual, you're going to need to get in a virtual queue. So if you're going to do, for example, like Tron or Guardians of the Galaxy, then you're going to need to get in this virtual line prior to going. So you're going to need to be familiar a little bit with the app. So you're going to need to have logged your tickets on the app. You're going to need to have done a little bit of like legwork beforehand so that you've got everything set up. So when you go out there, you're not panicking at 6:30 in the morning on your first day, because you know that the virtual queue for Guardians is going to open in half an hour, but you haven't loaded any tickets onto your app, for example. Like, just plan it in, and then everything is so much less stressful. I promise you. Next thing you might want to plan for regards to rides, you might want to plan for things such as like the height requirement to go on a ride. Obviously, if you've got kids, or maybe you're not the tallest person, which is fine. Ultimately, you might just need to work out which rides your child's going to be able to get on. So it's worth knowing before you go, because one of the worst things, and I don't know because I don't have kids, but surely one of the worst things you can do is, like, I don't know, turn up to, I'll use IOA as an example. You turn up to Islands of Adventure and you're like, right, we're going to go on the Hulk ride. And then they go up to the queue and it turns out they can't go on it. Like, that's just, you're teeing yourself up. You're teeing yourself up. I'd plan for it. And I'd know full well which rides you're going to be able to get on before you get there, because you're going to save so much disappointment. And, like, you know, if I were that kid, I'd be gutted. I'd be gutted if I thought I was going to be getting on it, and then it turns out I get there, and then I'll get told by the person at the start of the queue that, no, you're not allowed on. Like, that's not cool. Not cool. Another thing that might be worth doing with regards to rides is knowing the average wait times. So know which rides are busy. So you might, you know, and I'm going off on a bit of a tangent from the actual itinerary of like how you would map out your holiday. We kind of work that out to an extent. But I'm saying, like, obviously, if you know that there's going to be high queue times on some rides, then you might want to plan them in as to when you're actually going to do them in a day. So again, let's use an example of Rise of the Resistance. So Rise of Resistance realistically is going to be the longest queue time. I say the longest. That and Slinky are probably going to be the two highest ride times in Hollywood studios. But it's worth knowing how long that queue is going to be, and it's worth knowing what kind of the averages are throughout the day, because I would rope drop it and I would head straight to Rise of Resistance, for example. But some people might go, you know what, we really, really want to do Tower of Terror first. We're itching to do it. Fair enough. Use your crowd calendar for an example and have a look and see when Rise of Resistance potentially gets quieter. And it might say that at 3 p.m, then it starts to die down a little bit. And then you might be able to plan into your day that, you know, maybe come mid-afternoon, we'll go and get in the queue for that. Next thing you might do is, and I did touch on it a second ago, is know whether or not you need to get in the virtual queue, and also know whether or not you potentially, if there are really busy rides and there's really popular rides, then it might be worth knowing whether or not to get things such as the Lightning Lane passes or express passes in the Universal. I personally am not saying that they are a requirement. I don't think that they are an absolute must do. But if you want to make your life a bit easier, obviously, you know, it's going to cut down the wait times on your day. Fair enough. Hopefully that kind of wraps it up. Hopefully that kind of wraps up how I would do a bit of an itinerary and what things I would put into it. You can plan for as much as you want or as little as you want. Those things that I've just previously listed are the things that I would personally look at, and those are the things that I would take into account when I'm actually trying to do an itinerary for my holiday. I'll go into it and I'll know exactly how many days I'm going to be there for. I know exactly which parks I plan on doing. There's no winging it. There's no suddenly like waking up in the morning, God forbid, waking up at 10 a.m. If anyone's doing this in Orlando, I'm like, what are you doing? And fair enough, you know, if that's how you do it, then who am I to tell you you're wrong? But if you, like, say you got up at 10 a.m. and you went, right, now we're gonna head over to Magic Kingdom, and you turn up there and it's hellishly busy, then just don't be surprised. Like, so this is what I'm saying, like, just plan it a little bit, because ultimately you're going to thank yourself later down the line. You will have so much more enjoyable experience, a so much less stressful experience, and just so much more fun and time to actually, like, make memories and have laughs, eat food, ride rides, and that is what it's all about. As I've said so many times before, it's such a busy holiday and you're always trying to get so much in. You're trying to plan so much into a day. You're trying to plan rides, parks, foods, shopping, other activities, trying to keep everyone in your party happy as well. Like, there's a lot of variables and things to consider when trying to plan your trip out. And, you know, if you just put a little bit of time into putting a bit of a plan together, then honestly, it could just make it so much better. Absolutely. I know that so many people do an itinerary. I know that, like, I've spoken to people when they do like spreadsheets, and they'll basically be working out fully what they're going to do every day. And like, I'm not saying they're going to be working out what rides they're going to be doing at what point, but they might at least map out the rides that are important to them, so they know which day they're going, and they go, you know what, the rides that are important to me are X, Y, and Z, and those are our priority. So then we can prioritize those, and we make sure that when we leave the park, we're satisfied because we did all of the things that we set out there to do. So that pretty much sums up the itinerary episode. Honestly, if I have to say itinerary one more time, I think I might scream, because I have got it wrong. At this point, I think about 100 times. I'm sick of the word, and I don't want to say it ever again. I wish I called it the Florida Planning One or something like that. As ever, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you all for watching as well. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all of your support. Genuinely, it means the world to me. The amount of people who interact with me, share, and listen to this podcast is unbelievable. So, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will speak to you all in the next one.